We've all heard of some of the disastrous consoles and their games released over the years, but what are some of the good games released on these bad consoles? All the games here are console exclusives to the console mentioned, and by bad system, I mean a system that sold poorly and is generally not well regarded by gamers afterwards. So now, let's get started. Perhaps one of the best known console failures was the Virtual Boy from Nintendo. The Virtual Boy was one of the earliest flirtations Nintendo had with 3D, later being used in their 3DS. Always eager for a gimmick, Nintendo decided to make a handheld device completely based around the concept, except it never actually ended up being handheld, since the device is so unwieldy you had to play it on a desk with a controller. Not a good start, but Nintendo decided to barrel on, just adding a little stand for it to rest on. Problem solved, right? Well, except the weird viewing angle caused neck injury for many of the users. No problem, release it anyway, it'll be a big hit. Except color LCD screens are making users sick, so let's make it monochrome red. Yeah, that's great, my eyes aren't bleeding at all. This'll be a big hit. Oh, and also let's build an entire factory in China just to make the thing. What could go wrong? Well, as we know, the system bombed, and was Nintendo's second least popular system ever, only after the Nintendo 64 DD, which was only released in Japan. But as I've mentioned, this is Nintendo, so you better believe we got some top quality games for the system. Possibly the highest regarded is Virtual Boy Wario Land, developed and published by the Big N in 1995. You take the role of Wario, who has been trapped in an underground labyrinth while attempting to steal treasure from the native mask guys. While in the labyrinth, Wario decides to rob the natives of as much of their treasure as possible before escaping to the surface. As you go through the game, as in most Wario games, you collect different hats which give you different powers, like the power to fly or shoot flames. You also traverse different levels, involving running water, quicksand or a house maze. Most levels also involve you moving to a background area, using special blocks, intended to display the 3D capabilities of the system. There are also some enemies which move forward and back using this 3D effect. And overall, this is a very good Nintendo platformer. There is a lot of variety in levels, there are many different enemies and many different mechanics to master as you traverse each level. For example, you have to climb up waterfalls or avoid getting drowned in quicksand, and there are also hidden secrets dotted around the game to be found, encouraging exploration and extending gameplay. The hats also shake up the gameplay, giving you extra powers like the ability to burn enemies with a flamethrower or fly around the map. You can also combine different hats, allowing you, for example, to both shoot flames and fly at the same time. The music is atmospheric, incidental music, which does add to the atmosphere and makes it feel like you're sneaking around being a thief, but wouldn't be much to listen to on its own. As for the graphics, well, they're completely red. Everything is red. I mean, apart from that they're good, but it's kind of hard to get past the monochrome. On the gameplay side, one thing you could say is that the boss battles are a bit short and easy. It would have been nice to have a longer challenge on these climax levels. In fact, the game overall is quite short and easy. It won't take you more than a few hours to breeze through, but more content can be found in later playthroughs. Nonetheless, this is still a great game. Whether it's worth the neck pain, I'll leave up to you to decide. The Amstrad GX4000, one of a few attempts around 1990 by computer manufacturers to enter the profitable gaming market, following the success of the NES. This console was based on the Amstrad CPC computer first released in 1984, which was already discontinued by 1990 when this console released. So at Amstrad they thought, hey, we got this old computer lying around, let's re-release it as a console. Kids love consoles, right? Meanwhile, there were already 16-bit computers on the market and the Mega Drive would be released in the same year, with the SNES coming along soon after. So this machine was basically ignored at the time, getting very few releases, mostly CPC games. But a few good games did come out. Some well-regarded games are Pang and Navy Seals, as well as the one we're looking at today, Batman, or Batman the Movie, developed and produced in 1989 by Ocean Software. The game, logically enough, has you take the role of Batman, who has to stop the Joker from destroying Gotham City. You do this across multiple different levels, each with a different genre. For example, the first level is a 2D platformer where you traverse a chemical plant taking on the Joker's henchmen. You use the Batarang to defeat enemies and your grappling hook to get around. It can be pretty satisfying to swing around the level like this, and especially to drop down and land on enemies, though I don't think this was intended as it actually does damage. The game then switches you to the Batmobile as you dodge city traffic while staying ahead of the Joker's van which is chasing you. You can use the grappling hook again here, this time to grab lampposts and swing around them to make a quick turn, which is another very satisfying mechanic and makes it a lot easier to escape the Joker's van. You then have to figure out the 3 consumer items which have been laced with poison by the Joker. At least that's what I read afterwards, I had no idea what was going on at the time. This is basically like that old game where you're guessing a code with 4 items, except here it's 3. And with each guess you get told how many items are correct in total, and then you have to figure out exactly which items fit the code. It's kind of hard to explain, just look up at Mastermind or Bulls and Cows and you'll see. Then Batman is put in the Batwing and you have to fly under a load of balloons, cutting the strings without hitting the actual balloons themselves, which are apparently full of poison gas. This level is hard. There are occasional helicopters to get in your way and some balloons which arrive at the same time, making it pretty difficult to get them all without getting hit. Then lastly you have another 2D platforming section like the first level, where you traverse your way to the final showdown with the Joker. The graphics are nice, though pretty average quality for the time, and the music isn't great. It doesn't always fit the mood, and in the Batwing level it adds to the slowness which is created by the Batwing's speed. Overall, this is a difficult but fun 80s action game. It's true it's no Super Mario World, the platforming levels can sometimes be a bit cheap and repetitive, and the Batwing level is quite slow and at times frustrating. But there is a lot of variety, and the different types of levels prevent the game from getting repetitive, with the puzzle level breaking up the action nicely. And the Batmobile level is pretty cool, where you're whizzing around the city, slingshotting off lampposts to avoid the Joker's henchmen. It's still quite short, but also quite hard, so it should keep you going for a few hours at least. Of course, it's impossible to get, so it's not like you're ever going to play this, but hey, if you come across it, give it a go. The next game is on the PC FX, NEC's attempt to recapture the success of the PC Engine. And what do all the kids in the 90s love? That's right, CDs. And that's what NEC were banking on for their next generation mega console. Unfortunately, they didn't bother with 3D graphics or making the system affordable, so the system got next to no games and couldn't compete with the PlayStation or the Saturn, which had already been released by then. So the console was discontinued shortly after with very few games released. But before that, there were a few quality games. Amongst them Chip Chan Kick, Zeroigar, or the one we're looking at today, Kishin Doji Zenki FX Vajura Fight, developed and produced by Hudson Soft in 1995. This console was heavy on the cutscenes, and why not? This was one of the selling points of the system, as well as banking on anime tie-ins to drive its popularity, and this game is no exception, with a long title scene beginning the game, which is honestly pretty cool. The game also has many breaks in the action where you listen to dialogue between the characters. It's probably at this point that I should note that the entire game is in Japanese and there's no translation out there that I know of, so unless you speak Japanese you probably won't get the full value of the cutscenes. But the game still has a lot to offer. This is generally called a beat 'em up, though it's based around a number of key one-on-one fights with bosses, broken up by fairly easy, inconsequential beat 'em up levels, as you make your way to the next boss battle. The beat 'em up levels involve you going through corridors defeating monsters. The aesthetics are great. This was really one of the strengths of the system. There is great animation and visuals here, and these levels give you a break from the frenetic boss fights. You take the role of either Zenki or Chiaki, each with a different style of fighting. Zenki is more of a close-up melee fighter, using physical force and combos to deal damage to enemies. Chiaki is a range fighter. She can shoot fireballs from afar and is generally better off just plain avoiding bosses and picking them off from a distance. There is also this random character who appears out of nowhere and drops a bracelet power-up, which, if you're Zenki, changes you to a much more powerful form, allowing you to do and take more damage and perform better moves. If you're Chiaki, then this stronger form Zenki will run across the screen dealing huge damage to your enemy. The heart of the game really is the boss fights. There are a lot of them throughout the game, and they can get pretty crazy. These are characters from the anime who are trying to kill Zenki. They each have their own persona, style and special moves, and they each have a very unique aesthetic and even their own lair. But regardless of the differences, each fight is very hectic and action-packed. There's a lot happening on screen and you have to be fast to both avoid attacks and also prevent enemies from dealing devastating blows. And that can be tricky, since these enemies often have moves which can nearly knock you out in one go, so you need to keep your wits about you to make it to the very end. Overall, it's a frenetic action-paced game which is lots of fun. Unfortunately, however, the game is very short. You'll probably get it finished in a few hours or less, and beyond playing it through as whatever character you didn't pick, there isn't much replayability here, but it's fun while it lasts. We now move on to the Philips CDI. It's perhaps harsh to call this a console, as it was really designed to be a home entertainment system, with educational material as well as entertainment produced for the system, and the ability to play video and audio CDs. Amongst gamers, the console is known especially for a number of QuickTime and FMV games which were widespread at the time. But it was not to be for the CDI, as the games on the system were not enough to draw people away from the likes of the SNES or the later PlayStation, nor was the educational material enough of a draw on its own. But it did have some good games while it lasted. The first we're looking at is The Apprentice, developed by Division Factory and published by Philips Interactive in 1994. The game is a 2D platformer which has you play as Marvin, the apprentice to a wizard, who is forced to perform tasks set for him by his master. These tasks invariably involve traversing across platforms and enemies, eventually reaching a boss who you must defeat in order to complete the task the wizard has set for you. And these levels are fun. They are very dynamic and varied, with a lot of platforming, obstacles, and general goings-on to keep you engaged. Each level has a different theme, generally involving a new mechanic which works to prevent the game from getting stale, such as the ice level or a high-tech level where you use teleporters to get around, or swimming or flying levels. You also have different attacks in different levels, from your magic wand to a water gun or a bouncing ball, and at the end of each level is a boss who needs to be defeated while avoiding various projectiles. There are also a variety of enemies depending on what level you're in, and they don't just appear to be easily killed. You sometimes have to plan jumps a few platforms ahead in anticipation of where the enemy will be, rather than where they are. I could imagine this game being a big hit if it had been released on a different platform at the time, but as it is, it wallowed in obscurity on the CDI. Nonetheless, there are still a few problems with the game. The hit detection for landing on the platforms is a bit imprecise. You will often fall off the edge when it feels like you should have made a jump, and in the swimming levels you will get caught on edges constantly when it feels like you shouldn't. But apart from that, it's a great game, and as you can see, the colourful graphics and jaunty music really add to the atmosphere. I'd like to see this re-released on Android or even Switch so it could get a bit of the attention it never got in the 90s. Staying with the CDI, as I mentioned above, the platform's strengths, if it had any, were FMV games, playing on the whole CD aspect, and it had some good ones, like the port of Dragon's Lair or Brain Dead 13. Well, here we have the FMV point-and-click adventure Burn Cycle, developed by Trip Media and published by Philips Interactive in 1994. The game is a cyber-noir story where you take the role of Saul Cutter, a hacker whose latest theft from megacorporation Softtech was booby-trapped and has left him with a deadly virus inside his brain. Cutter must now find out who's responsible and deactivate the virus within 2 real-time hours or meet his demise. In this quest, you will be taken across the world of Burn Cycle into dingy bars and secret labs, shooting henchmen and playing secret underground games. The story and settings are pretty interesting. The game creates a pretty cool noir story set in a cyberpunk world, although the costumes are a very 90s tinted view of the future. Nonetheless, this game has a great atmosphere. The actors' film noir voiceovers really set the scene and bring you into the experience. The game also creates some interesting characters. They feel like real fixtures of this cyberpunk world we're in. They can be funny, mysterious, and entice you to keep playing, just what you want in a point-and-click adventure. There are also a number of mysteries, semi-hinted at, like characters who appear and disappear unexplained, which draws you deeper into the world and make you want to keep exploring. The backgrounds are great, very surrealist, and also create a great sense of this crazy future world we're in. The acting is not perfect, to be honest, but it's good for a 90s era FMV game, which to be fair is not saying a lot. The main character, Cutter's actor, is good with his atmospheric voiceovers I mentioned earlier, and some of the minor characters are great for their role. Some of the side characters, however, are a bit hammy, but hey, isn't that half the charm of playing one of these games? Apart from the story elements, there are gameplay elements between the cutscenes you must complete to continue the story. Like I said, the story parts are pretty cool and interesting, and the minigames aren't terrible, but they can get frustrating at times. Sometimes it's a straightforward shooting scene, but other times you have to solve a cryptic puzzle or pass a reaction test to beat a competitor in a futuristic betting game. It would have been nicer if the devs had eased up on the difficulty a bit, seeing as there's not much skill involved in these games, but also since people will be playing this more for the story than the gameplay. You also get sent all the way back to the start of the game if you lose one of these gameplay sections, so make sure to save often, something which you're not prompted to do before these sections. The game is also pretty linear. There are not a lot of exploration segments, no mini-quests or side characters to get stuck in conversation with. You're pretty much just following the story start to finish. But overall, Burn Cycle is a fun point-and-click game with an atmospheric world and a fun story, only let down by the slightly frustrating gameplay sections. If you like this video, you can leave a like, and I've made a few more of these types of videos that you can watch, and I plan to make even more, so if you're interested, you can subscribe to my channel by clicking the button here. Thanks for watching.